let's begin, Anderson, by understanding that Bernie Sanders has a D- voting record from the NRA. Let's also understand that back in 1988, when I first ran for the United States Congress, way back then, I told the gun owners of the state of Vermont, and I told the people of the state of Vermont, a state which has virtually no gun control, that I supported a ban on assault weapons. And over the years, I have strongly supported instant background checks, doing away with this terrible gun show loophole, and I think we've got to move aggressively at the federal level in dealing with the straw man purchases.
No one has the right to tell you you can't publish a book because you might libel somebody. Nobody tells you you can't own an automobile because there might be an accident, and nobody should tell you you can't own a gun because it might be misused. If somebody is liable, they have recourse in the courts. If somebody causes an accident with an automobile, this can be dealt with in the courts. The same way with a gun. If a gun is misused, it should be dealt with in the courts. Unfortunately, government doesn't enforce the law against those individuals who commit violent crimes. 70% of the crimes in this country are committed by individuals who have prior criminal records. This gun sure looks deadly, but it's not the least bit deadly unless I point it at someone and pull the trigger. In the words of Thomas Jefferson, he said that we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. And among those rights is our right to defend ourselves, defend our family, and to defend our property.
You don't consider yourself a capitalist, though.
Do I consider myself part of the casino capitalist process by which so few have so much and so many have so little? No, I don't.
You call yourself a democratic socialist. How can any kind of socialist win a general election in the United States?
Well, we're going to win because first we're going to explain what democratic socialism is. And what democratic socialism is about is saying that it is immoral and wrong that the top 1/10 of 1% in this country own almost 90%, own almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%.
A financial political crisis as a consequence of excessive debt, unfunded liabilities, spending, bailouts, and gross discrepancy in wealth distribution going from the middle class to the rich. No good has ever come from granting monopoly power to the state to use aggression against the people to arbitrarily mold human behavior. Such power, when left unchecked, becomes the seed of an ugly tyranny.
But, I think the attack on the rich, and people have pointed out quite frequently, that if you tax the rich, and took all their money, it only finances government for a very short period of time.
Right.
So I remember getting really criticized by somebody who was criticizing capitalism and how terrible this capitalism was, and I came back, but we don't have capitalism. We don't have free markets. We have fixed interest rates. We have intervention. We have overplanning, overspending, deficit. That's not what happens in a free market. A free market is designed quite differently. So I resent the fact when they blame the problems that we have. We've just had all these extremists believing in laissez-faire capitalism, and that's why we have this mess. They're wrong on that, and I'm trying to change people's minds regarding that issue.
The people who are most responsible get to write most of the rules and regulations. If you don't like the banking system, they get to write all the rules.
Supreme Court created documents have made it possible, in fact easy, for these corporations to buy our legislators. What would be your solution to that problem?
Well, I think only individuals have rights. You and I have rights. The individual, I emphasize the individual, not the unit, the group, or a group of people. No, I don't. And just because the Supreme Court, ruled a certain way, they weren't all that good on the slavery issue and civil liberty issues and the Jim Crow laws over many, many years. So they were pretty bad as far as the courts go. Mm-hmm. So I think the individual has rights. I believe that an individual is born. I believe in natural God-given rights for the individual. The individual is very important, and we don't gain advantages or disadvantages because we belong to a group, and you shouldn't have privileges, and you shouldn't be able to skirt responsibility, but you happen to be corporate. You still have the responsibility, and if I are in the corporation, then we have the responsibility.
Good to be with you, Rick.
When did you get the idea of seeking an audit, which sounds simple, but it's very brazen, seeking an audit of the Federal Reserve of the United States?
I will tell you exactly when that idea came to me. It came to me in early March 2009 when Ben Bernanke, chairman of the Fed, came before the Budget Committee on which I serve. And I asked, Chairman Bernanke, will you tell me and the American people which large financial institutions received over $2 trillion in zero interest or near zero interest loans? I think the American people have a right to know. And he said, sorry, not going to tell you. When, as a member of the Budget Committee, I asked the chairman of the Fed, Ben Bernanke, a very simple question. I asked him if he would tell me and the committee and the American people which financial institutions received over $2 trillion in zero interest or near zero interest loans. All we want to know is who got trillions of dollars. That's what we want to know. We want to know also on what basis, on what terms, who was at the meetings where key decisions were made.
I had expected Bernie Sanders to offer 604, which was the same as 1207, which is Audit the Fed bill. And at the last minute, he switched it and watered it down. And really, it adds nothing. It's a possibility that it even makes the current conditions worse. This is essentially the bill plus more of the bill we beat in the House Financial Committee, the Mel Watts bill. But this is so disappointing to me that this happened, especially since for months now I've worked with Bernie on this, and he introduced the bill in our language, which was 1207. But as we speak, this is Thursday night, they are working on this on the Senate floor, and we need to get as many messages possible to any senator you can think of, especially to Bernie Sanders' office, that we don't want this version. We want a true audit of the Fed. We need to know what the Open Market Committee does, and we need to know what they're doing overseas with the agreements with central banks and financial institutions and other governments. And in this bill that is being offered, that amendment that is being offered now does not include this.
Dr. Paul, those two Democrats and your son want to audit the Fed. You want to end it. How can you be so sure when so many smart people say we need the Fed for stability?
The mess that we're in now is a consequence of the Fed. The Fed has been getting away too long for their responsibility. First, they create the artificial bubbles, and they get a lot of credit for that. Then the crash comes, the correction comes, and then they claim, well, we'll print money faster and we'll get you out of it. And they get credit for, the bump upward. No secret cabal of bankers or government officials should have the authority to create money out of thin air, because they will. And they will destroy the money. It's been known for a long time, way back to ancient Chinese history, they tried this, and it doesn't work.
Well, Ronald Reagan is president, and the good news is we are into trickle-down economics. And here it is. And this chart tells it all. This is what the top 20% got. This is what the top 10% got. This is what the bottom 90% got. And here we are in the last number here, where we are today. And lo and behold, the top 10% gets it all, And frankly, this is a metaphor, this is an example of exactly what trickle-down economics is all about.
Hear leaders saying every day, we could have never seen this coming. This was a shock. How did this happen? I want to read what you said 5 years before the collapse. The special privileges granted to Fannie and Freddie have distorted the housing market by allowing them to attract capital that they could not attract under pure market conditions. Like all artificially created bubbles, the boom in housing prices cannot last forever. When housing prices fall, homeowners will experience difficulty as their equity is wiped out. Furthermore, the holders of the mortgage debt will also have a loss. These losses will be greater than they would have otherwise been had government policy not actively encouraged overinvesting in housing, and you go on to say because so many people will invest in housing, the damage will be catastrophic. Congressman, how could it be that you knew this on the banking committee in 2003 and nobody else did until after the collapse?
Well, I would think the easiest explanation is Washington, D.C. is permeated by Keynesian economic thinking. Very few even know the name Austrian economics and understand the business cycle. I was concerned about the building of the bubble since 1971 when gold was delinked from the dollar. So since that time, the bubble has been gradually being inflated, but it got out of hand in the 1990s as well as after 2000. Bernanke taking interest rates down to 1%. To me, the biggest surprise was, although I was very concerned in 2003, I was concerned before that, I'm surprised it lasted to 2007. That's when the bubble really burst. But it was amazing how long it lasts. And to me, the more amazing thing right now is not only has the financial system collapsed, which is very, very bad and very dangerous, I believe that what we're moving toward now is the collapse of the dollar.
$7.25 is now the federal minimum wage. It's a starvation wage. You do the arithmetic, people can't live on it. We have got to raise the minimum wage over a period of years to a living wage, in my view. Maybe it's a radical view. I don't think so. If somebody works 40 hours a week in the United States of America, that person should not be living in poverty. That's what a $15 minimum wage over a period of years would do. Now, you asked me the question, well, how do you negotiate with Republicans? And I'll tell you how. You rally the American people, who overwhelmingly believe, by the way, that the minimum wage should be raised, depending on the polls, maybe to $15 an hour.
Paul, another question from a Politico reader. Do you advocate getting rid of the minimum wage? Would that create more jobs?
Absolutely, and it would help the poor, the people who need a job. The minimum wage is a mandate. We're against mandates, so why should we have it? No, it would be very beneficial.
Raising minimum wages by government decree appeals to those who do not understand economics. This appeal is essentially strong during times of stagnant wages and increased economic inequality. But raising the minimum wage actually harms those at the bottom of the income ladder. Basic economic theory teaches that when the price of a good increases, demand for that good decreases. Raising the minimum wage increases the price of labor, thus decreasing the demand for labor. So an increased minimum wage will lead to hiring freezes and layoffs. Unskilled and inexperienced workers are the ones most often deprived of employment opportunities by increases in the minimum wage. Minimum wage laws are not the only example of government policies that hurt those at the bottom of the income scale. Many regulations that are prompted as necessary to rein in large corporations actually hurt small businesses.
But I think if you take global poverty that seriously, it leads you to conclusions that in the U.S. are considered out of political bounds. Things like sharply raising the level of immigration we permit, even up to a level of open borders, about sharply increasing the amount of foreign aid. Open borders.
That's a Koch brothers proposal. The
really?
idea, of course, I mean, that's a right-wing proposal which says essentially there is no United States.
But it would make a lot of the global poor richer, wouldn't it?
And it'd make everybody in America poor. Then you're doing away with the concept of a nation state. And I don't think there's any country in the world which believes in that. If you believe in a nation state, or in a country called the United States, or UK, or Denmark, or any other country, you have an obligation, in my view, to do everything we can to help poor people. What right-wing people in this country would love is an open border policy.
But the people who want big fences and guns, sure, we could secure the borders. A barbed wire fence with machine guns, that would do the trick. I don't believe that's what America is all about. I just really don't. We can enforce our law. If we had a healthy economy, this wouldn't be such a bad deal. People are worrying about jobs. But every time you think about this toughness on the border and ID cards and real IDs, think that it's a penalty against the American people, too. I think this fence business is designed and may well be used against against us and keep us in. In economic turmoil, the people want to leave with their capital, and there's capital controls and there's people control. So every time you think of a fence keeping all those bad people out, think about those fences maybe being used against us, keeping us in.
What about authorizing a formal vote that would give the president authorization to go to war against ISIS?
Everything is in the language. You can't talk in a general sense here. I support, have and do support the president using airstrikes. I think he has the right to do that. I think that they are working. I support that.
I agree. ISIS poses a threat
they are a
to the United
threat.
States. Are you worried about ISIS terrorists coming here to the United States?
I'm worried about everything. They are a threat to Europe, to the United States, to the region. They've got to be stopped. But it cannot be just the United States alone.
So, and you don't feel that the coalition that Secretary Kerry's talking about, 40 nations involved, you don't think that's good enough?
I read some of the language. It is not particularly strong at this point. And I know it's difficult. Kerry is trying. The president is trying. But I need stronger language.
Constitutional position. It is the advice of the founders to follow a non-interventionist foreign policy, stay out of entangling alliances, be friends with countries, negotiate and talk with them and trade with them. Just think of the tremendous improvement relationships with Vietnam. We lost 60,000 men. We came home in defeat. Now we go over there and invest in Vietnam. So there's a lot of merit to the advice of the founders and following the Constitution.
We should be supportive, along with other European countries, give them support. I support airstrikes, special missions, but at the end of the day, it's going to have to be the Muslim nations themselves who are leading the fight with our support.
You say you support airstrikes. What about the use of drones and the way they've been handled in the Obama administration?
Well,
you continue that?
Well, I don't think it's a yes or no. Clearly, it has been counterproductive when we kill innocent people, including Americans. But they are one tool that I think is in the arsenal, but clearly, in many instances, they have backfired on us.
There are no national security concerns that require such a foolish escalation of violence in the Middle East. There should be no doubt that our security interests are best served by completely staying out of the internal strife now raging in Syria. We are already too much involved in supporting the forces within Syria, anxious to overthrow their current government. Without outside interference, the strife, now characterized as a civil war, would likely be non-existent. Whether or not we attack yet another country occupying it and setting up a new regime that we hope we can control poses a serious constitutional question. From where does a president get such authority? Since World War II, the proper authority to go to war has been ignored. It has been replaced by international entities like the United Nations and NATO, or the president himself, while ignoring the Congress. And sadly, the people don't object. As we claim we are doing the same ourselves thousands of miles from our shore, there's no benefit for us to be picking sides, secretly providing assistance and encouraging civil strife in an effort to effect regime change in Syria.
The issue that we're talking about today is about fundamental rights, and it is about ending the disgrace, the national disgrace, that the United States of America remains the only major country on earth that does not guarantee health care to our people as a right of citizenship.
Healthcare is a human right.
Healthcare is absolutely a human right, whether you're rich or whether you're poor or whether you are in the middle class. Every person in this country has a right to know that when he or she gets sick, they're not going to face bankruptcy. They're not going to delay going to the doctor because they can't afford the deductible. That they know that they go to the doctor, they go to the hospital when they need to because they are a human being entitled to health care.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the medical care crisis that we're facing. Sometimes I'd like to think that it might be a government crisis rather than a medical care crisis, but we do have a mess in medicine, and there's a lot of talk about what's going on, not only throughout the country, but here in Washington. But first I'd like to describe how I see the problem developing and what has happened. A lot of people are arguing that free markets can't deliver medical care, which I disagree with. And the problems we face today is not a consequence of the marketplace, it's a failure of the government. This idea of managed care was introduced during the Nixon years. And this was a program designed to force people into medical care and provide PPO and HMOs and tax credits for certain groups and not any others. So we have been enduring managed care over these last 35 to 40 years. And what has developed from this has been corporate medicine. The individuals who were best able to gather up the money passed out by the government or mandated by the government, they became the chief lobbyists. So the drug companies lined up, the health insurance companies lined up, the health management companies lined up, and it turned out that they started running the show and actually confused the problems and made it less efficient. So there was too much management. At the same time, too much of the money was going into these corporations, which were sort of the middlemen, and patients have suffered, the doctors have become unhappy. The main complaint I hear is that medical care costs too much. I can't afford my insurance. And there's a lot of truth to this. But one thing that most people don't talk about is, why are the costs high? Why are the costs of medical care, why are the costs higher than, say, the cost of bread or computers or television sets or whatever? And the truth is, it's a reaction to government. It's a reaction to our monetary policy. We do inflate the money supply. We do have price inflation. But prices go up more so in certain areas that the government gets involved in than in others. So the government's more involved in education and medical care, so you have more inflation there. And that is part of the problem. But over these years, there has been less competition in medicine. And that's been gradual over 100 years or so, where people couldn't enter the medical field without getting all kinds of licenses and protecting special groups. But if there's more competition and there's less insurance, actually cost goes down.
Senator Sanders, right here in Nevada, there will be a measure to legalize recreational marijuana on the 2016 ballot. You said you smoked marijuana twice, didn't quite work for you. If you were a Nevada resident, how would you vote?
I suspect I would vote yes. And I would vote yes because I am seeing in this country too many lives being destroyed for nonviolent offenses. We have a criminal justice system that lets CEOs on Wall Street walk away, and yet we are imprisoning or giving jail sentences to young people who are smoking marijuana.
The drug war was mentioned. I think that's another war we ought to cancel, because it is to nobody's benefit.
But I just wanted you to clarify, when you say cancel the war on drugs, does that mean legalize all these drugs?
I think the federal war on drugs is a total failure. You can at least let sick people have marijuana because it's helpful, but compassionate conservatives say, well, we can't do this. We're going to put people who are sick and dying with cancer, and they're being helped with marijuana if they have multiple sclerosis. The federal government's going in there and overriding state laws and putting people like that in prison. Why don't we handle the drugs like we had alcohol? Alcohol's a deadly drug. What about the real deadly drugs are the prescription drugs? They kill a lot more people than the illegal drugs. So the drug war is out of control. I fear the drug war because it undermines our civil liberties. It magnifies our problems on the borders. We spend, like, over the last 40 years, $1 trillion on this war. And believe me, the kids can still get the drugs. It just hasn't worked.
It seems clear to me what we should be doing, and I think the scientific community is in agreement. First, we need to aggressively expand energy efficiency all over this country. In terms of older homes and buildings, we can save an enormous amount of fuel, cut carbon emissions, lower fuel bills, create jobs if we do that. Furthermore, we must move aggressively to such sustainable energies as wind, solar, biomass, geothermal, and other technologies. And we must invest in research and development to make those technologies even more efficient. In my view, it is a no-brainer to say that we must reject the proposed Keystone XL pipeline once and for all. We need to end tax breaks and subsidies for oil and coal companies, which amount to well over $10 billion a year. We should not be subsidizing those companies that are helping to destroy our planet. Finally, we need to price carbon through a carbon tax or some other approach so that the real cost of burning carbon are reflected in the price. Bottom line here is we cannot afford to reject basic science. We have to listen to what the scientific community is saying. We have got to act aggressively, and let's do it. And with that, Mr. President, I would yield the floor.
The last point we'd like to touch on is the environment. If you're opposed to less government, how would you enforce environmental restrictions upon companies polluting the environment?
You know, this is not an easy one, but a very important one in that there are some real good libertarian studies on this. The first thing is your body, you as an individual, and your property is sacred in the sense that nobody can hurt you or take your property. That includes your air that you breathe. So if there's a chemical plant that's spewing over chemicals into your place, he's violating your rights and doesn't have a right to. You have the right to go to the government and get an injunction against somebody who's polluting your air. So property rights can deal with this much better than the government has been doing. Governments are the greatest polluters. If you look at it, government is involved in all kinds of pollution of rivers and different things over the years. So it is much easier and much better, except I would admit that there are some problems that are difficult. When you have rivers river pollution, interstate, and problems between countries, but it's still much better for us to handle these through the private marketplace and property rights than it is for the government. Governments tend to give out permits. You know, if you don't pollute too much and you pay so much to the government, or if your fine isn't too much, you pay your fine. So in a way, they legitimatize a lot of the pollution. We'd be much stricter on pollution problems than the government is. We would do it strictly on a property basis, and nobody has a right to pollute anybody's air or property.
What you're going to have to do, if you really want to grow the middle class, is say that everybody in this country, regardless of their income, if they have the ability, they're going to get a college education. And today I just introduced legislation that would make public colleges and universities tuition-free.
Where's the money going to come from?
A tax on Wall Street speculation.
What is your stand on education reform and the No Child Left Behind Act?
We need a fundamental rethinking from the ground up.
Congressman Paul.
News going in the right direction, but not far enough. The Constitution is very, very clear. There's no authority for the federal government to be involved in education. There's no prohibition in the Constitution for the states to be involved in education. That's not a bad position, and we can sort things out. But once again, the senators was for No Child Left Behind, but now he's running for president. Now he's running to repeal No Child Left Behind once again.
I have a lifetime pro-choice, 100% pro-choice voting rights record. I think, I understand that people disagree on this issue, but I believe that it is a woman's decision. It's a difficult decision, but it's a decision between her and her physician. And I will do everything that I can in 50 states of this country to make sure that women have that choice.
But John, once again, it's a medical subject, and I'm a doctor, No, I do want to make a couple comments because I can remember the very early years studying obstetrics, and I was told, and it was before the age of abortion, and I was told, taking care of a woman that's pregnant, you have 2 patients, and I think that solves a lot of the problem. I followed what my understanding is of the Constitution, and it does allow for the states to deal with difficult problems. Matter of fact, it allows the states to deal with almost all the problems if you look at it. It is not given, these powers aren't given to the Congress. I see abortion as a violent act. All other violence is handled by the states. Murder, burglary, violence, that's a state issue. So don't try to say that I'm less pro-life because I want to be particular about the way we do it and allow the states the prerogative. This is the solution. This is the solution because if we would allow the states to write their laws, take away the jurisdiction by a majority vote in the Congress, you repeal Roe versus Wade overnight instead of waiting year after year to change the court system.
Senator Sanders? Edward Snowden.
I think Snowden played a very important role in educating the American people to the degree in which our civil liberties, constitutional rights are being undermined.
Is he a hero?
He did break the law, and I think there should be a penalty to that.
My thoughts are similar to Peter's in this sense. You don't want a situation where everybody who works for the government suddenly wakes up and say, I think I'm going to reveal this information despite any oath or agreement that I made. You're going to have chaos. On the other hand, like Martin Luther King Jr. And others, if you feel strongly enough about something, you break the law. He broke the law. I think clearly that as a nation, we should, as a government, I think that there should be an effort to enter into a plea agreement. I do not want to see. I suspect he would like to return to his country and not live in exile, and I would hope that we can do that. So I would hope that charges be lessened.
So what do you think of the Bradley Mannings and the Edward Snowdens?
Well, I think highly of them. I think of them like Daniel Ellsberg. Daniel Ellsberg, was they tried to put him away for a long time in prison. They tried the New York Times for releasing the truth about how the Vietnam War was started, how we were lied into that war. And I think people now are trying to tell us the truth about what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan. They should be seen more as heroes. Well, from what I hear and what he's done, I mean, he's done a great service because he's telling the truth, and this is what we are starved for. The American people are starved for the truth. And when you have a dictatorship or an authoritarian government, truth becomes treasonous. And this is what they do. If you are a whistleblower, or if you're trying to tell the American people that our country is destroying our rule of law and destroying our Constitution, they turn it on and they say, oh, you're committing treason. So this is a big problem. And to expect any changes without an announcement like this, things keep getting worse. They've gotten worse steadily for the past 10 years. So essentially there is no Fourth Amendment anymore. And for somebody to tell the American people the truth is a heroic effort. I'd like to talk about monetary policy a bit. The dollar's been in the news, gold's been in the news, and a significant event has just recently transpired. It happened on November 2nd, and to me it was a very significant event. That was the day the Indian Central Bank announced that it had purchased 200 tons of gold from the IMF. And that was more or less the tipping point on this recent surge in the gold price. The reason I think this is a significant date is, in some ways, it is almost the opposite of what happened back in 1971 on August 15th, a very special day in monetary history, and I talk about that a whole lot. That is when the world announced that gold was officially demonetized. No currency would be linked to gold. The dollar would still be the reserve standard, and everything would be okay. Instead, what we got was the biggest bubble in the history of mankind, which is now now being deflated. So to me, the fact that the Central Bank of India has now purchased this gold at the same time the IMF is getting rid of the gold and the West is getting rid of the gold, it means that there's a major shift in economic power, and that is from the West to the East. And this is no surprise. Jobs have gone to the East, and productivity has gone to the East. Savings has gone to the East. The West has become more indebted. And it's not just the United States, it's Europe as well. And I think this signals the time when gold will be remonetized. I don't think it's never been demonetized in a sense. I think gold has always been money, but they pretended it wasn't money. In the 60s, they wanted to demonetize gold, and by 71, they claimed they officially did it. And even throughout these several decades, they pretend that gold is not money. At the same time, economic law still prevails, but this announcement, I think, will prove to be a very significant announcement. Constant devaluation. So here we have a government's official policy. Announced policy is that we have a strong dollar. At the same time, the real policy is constantly devaluating the dollar. And of course, for an economy to grow, you ought to have a relatively stable currency. People shouldn't have something wildly fluctuating, and certainly you shouldn't have a currency that can be created out of thin air. And that's where we are today. But my concern has been for many, many years the eventual consequence of what this will have on the dollar. We've seen a financial crisis build. We've seen a lot of liquidation of debt. We've seen a lot of purchasing of bad debt by our government and by the Federal Reserve. At the same time, it's all done by the creation of new money out of thin air. You can do that just so long. You can defy economic laws for a while, but just like you can keep gold at $35 an ounce and you can manipulate markets, eventually the economic laws will rule. And I think this is what will happen, is we will continue to do this. Congress has no concern. They're willing to pass a medical care program going to cost trillions of dollars and pretend it won't cost anything. But there will always be a cost as the pressure is going to be put on the dollar. The financial obligation we have to maintain our empire and our welfare state is just overwhelming, and they're illiquid. I mean, if you look at Medicare and Medicaid, these are programs that are literally bankrupt. So everything is dependent on the willingness of the world and the people to put trust in the dollar. At the same time, regardless of what our Secretary of the Treasury says, we are embarking and continue to just print the money in an unlimited fashion, and that means devaluation regardless of what they tell us. To me, that is very, very dangerous. If we want to preserve our freedoms in this country, we will have to address the important subject of liberty and understanding that and what rights are all about, but we also will have to understand the issue of monetary policy. I rise this evening to announce that I introduced some legislation today dealing with the calamity that we have found at our airports with TSA. Something has to be done. Everybody's fed up. The people are fed up. The pilots are fed up. I'm fed up. You know, I've come to this floor many times over the past many years and complained about the terrible foreign policy we've had, the terrible monetary policy we had, the excessive spending and the debt, and also the tax policy. But what we're doing and what we're accepting and putting up with at this airport is so symbolic of us just not standing up and saying, enough is enough.
President Obama signed the National Defense Authorization Act into law. He enacted a provision allowing him to indefinitely detain American citizens in U.S. military custody. Many, including Congressman Paul, have called this unconstitutional.
I think we're going in the wrong direction for the protections of our liberties here at home. They're under deep threat. The Patriot Act has eliminated the Fourth Amendment. We now have a policy of preemptive war. You don't have to declare war, and you don't even have to have an enemy. We can start the wars. That's what preemptive war is all about. Now, with the Military Appropriation Defense Act, this is major. This says that the military can arrest an American citizen for under suspicion, and he can be held indefinitely without habeas corpus and denied a lawyer indefinitely, even in a prison here. Let me give you one statistic. You're worrying about all these, where we're going to try people, where are they going to do? We have to do it secretly because our rule of law is so flawed. We have arrested 362 people related to Al-Qaeda top operation. 260 of them are in prison. They've been tried and convicted. So don't give up on our American judicial system so easily, I beg of you.